And thank you, everyone. Good evening for being here. This is really a big moment for our institute. This is the beginning of a series of lectures that we thought we would uh, put up for the general public, for interest in the lay audience. We do a lot of things that have to do with science and research, but I think part of the mission of the Envirome Institute is to create an interface where we could have the arts and the sciences, or real world issues, journalism, and other economics and other aspects of our lives come together in general fruition, because we believe that to be healthy, we have to have all different forms of health, and not just physical health, but also emotional health and cultural health, economic health, and so on. So, continuing with this spirit, we want to start a dialogue between our general community and the people here in the city of Louisville and at the Envirome Institute to create a conversation that would help us understand how we do our work and help others understand what we do as this institute. So, in that vein, this is my high privilege today to be able to welcome very distinguished guests, and I would first invite Ambassador Todd to give us come here, give us a few words, introduce the speaker. Um, Todd Sedgwick was a former U.S. ambassador to Slovak Republic and is a graduate of the Harvard School, and he has experience in a variety of different areas. He's been a successful journalist, he's been a publisher, entrepreneur, and active tenure with various nonprofits group, the Civil War Preservation Trust, and the First World War Memorial. He's been a really distinguished figure and quite well-known circles in Washington, D.C. And we are extremely fortunate to have him here and interact with us. And with his inspiration and support, we started this whole lecture series, which we call the Sedgwick Lecture Series. So, Pastor Sedgwick.
Well, thank you very much, Rudy. This is the first of a series of lectures, and we're saving the best for first in this case. And I'm delighted to introduce my friend. I won't say old friends, I'll say friends of long standing. Jim and Debbie Fallows. Jim was a president of the Harvard Crimson when I was an associate editor. Debbie is my classmate there. They went to school about the same time Joe Artery went there. Jim was the youngest ever speechwriter for, I know we're all thinking about Jimmy Carter these days. He was the youngest ever speechwriter for President Carter. The youngest ever speechwriter for any president up to President Carter and since. And then wrote for the for the Washington Monthly and the Atlantic Monthly, and was editor of the U.S. News and World Report in between that. A couple of years ago, he launched a Substack site called Breaking the News, and I highly recommend this site. The thing about Jim that I admire is he's a very original thinker. He doesn't go with the conventional wisdom on anything. He does his own research and has an original way of thinking about everything. Fallows.substack.com. He's the author. Sorry, I hope I'm not being too mercantile here. He's the author of some 11 books. Debbie Fallows is the fellow at the New American Foundation and was assistant dean of linguistics and languages at Georgetown University in Washington, holds a PhD in theoretical linguistics. And this very talented duo has come together to do this very exciting book, bestseller, called Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America. And they flew all over the country in their single-engine Cirrus plane, which I've flown in that plane. I'm not a pilot, but I love the plane. It's really a wonderful little plane. And but the premise of the book is basically that, when people look at the United States and they look at Washington and the paralysis and the polarization in Washington, they think, well, this country is broken. But Jim and Debbie have gone all across the country and have seen how in the so-called flyover country, people disagree with each other, but they can come together to actually solve problems. And here in Louisville, for example, we have a new mayor, a new university president, a new congressman. And so there are real possibilities for a fresh beginning for the city. I just want to come back to Envirome Institute, Aruni, and say that two of the key ingredients that Jim and Debbie have come up with for successful communities are research university and revitalizing downtown. So I think with your urban campus that you and Christy Brown are going forward with, that is going to really push Louisville forward. So thank you so much, and I think Jim is going to start with a HBO clip.
It's a 90-second trailer.
5 years ago, we asked people to tell us the story of your town. We've been traveling and reporting.
We thought there must be something going on in America. People wanted to talk about their town.
What we saw, how towns rise and fall, has a lot to say to our world right now.
This was a depressed timber town.
Bend was really grasping for what was going to be next.
The past is the past, and Mississippi is striving for change.
We need to replace judgment with compassion, and we need to replace punishment with treatment.
We're a safe haven. We feed the kids. They think, oh, this is just a boxing gym. That's far from the truth. We are fixing what needs to be fixed around here.
Almost every place we went, people said, the U.S. is really in horrible shape. But here, things are really moving ahead. What's your secret?
We all come together.
If it can happen here in the poorest of all states, then the positive things are replicable elsewhere.
The story of my town is the American story of this era.
So, I am Jim Fallows of the Jim and Deb duo. We are so grateful to be here. To our dear friend of many years standing, Todd, to Christy, to all of you in the Envirome Institute, in the Louisville community, to Dr. B and Dr. Clay for inviting us. And we just are so grateful to be able to share briefly with you some of the things we've seen. I'm going to give you, and we're also, as Todd was saying, the concept we're going to try to advance is a healthy community in all dimensions of the term, not just financial health and fiscal health and public health and civic health, but that's what we're going to try to talk to you about. Here is the roadmap for the few minutes ahead. I'm going to give you a brief setup of 4 or 5 minutes about how Deb and I followed the road that led us to this evening with you all here in the lovely building in the Filson Center, and the kinds of things, how we started on this journey, the main discoveries, and what's happened in our understanding of the U.S. and the theme we're advancing in the last couple of years of the pandemic. Then Deb is going to give you a fascinating bit of new material. These are new things we've seen recently in a different part of the country, entirely different landscape, but similar challenges. And people who have ideas we think you'll find interesting. Then I'll do a brief sort of closing, a big finish to what Deb says, and then we'll be happy to have questions. So that's our plan for the next while. And the idea is to try we'll try to learn about Louisville because you all are much more expert than we are, but also share the things we've heard from other parts of the country. So a word of background in this project. We started this roughly 10 years ago. Is this okay for feedback? Okay. So we started this project 10 years ago. We've been living in China for a number of years. In China, we traveled around to smaller cities from our homes in Beijing and Shanghai, trying to see what the country looked like away from the places that get all the media attention. So we began thought we'd do that in the US too. And starting in 2013, we wanted to go to cities that usually were in the news only when something went wrong, only when there was a tornado or some other mishap. Instead, consider those towns as they thought of themselves. Why did people move there? Why did they move away? Why did they come back? Why did their children live there? What was good? What was bad? We started this in a time when the great financial recession of 2008 was in recent memory. And we kept doing it through recoveries of the election of the midterm elections of 2014, the national election of 2016, all the things that have happened in the country. We finished the filming just before the pandemic and produced the film during the pandemic. And we've seen a fascinating shift in reactions to our argument over the years we've been working on this. Starting about 8 years ago, when we were writing in the Atlantic and elsewhere saying, you wouldn't believe the contrast between the national level perspective, where so many things seem paralyzed, and the local level perspective, most places, most of the time, from most people, thinking they were making some progress. 6 or 8 years ago, people thought, isn't that cute? Isn't that quaint? Isn't that cherry picking? Now I think it's become the conventional wisdom for many large foundations, for news organizations, for other people, thinking that the sort of productive future of the U.S. is mainly in the local and the regional hands now. That we have our issues at the national level, and they matter, of course, but the real leverage is at the local level. We had countless discoveries on this journey, which we recount in the book, and I'm not going to recount for you right now, but they involve things like the importance of downtowns, the importance of craft breweries as a marker of civic success. And I know that Louisville does very well on that and similar fronts. About the crucial importance of equity in growth. Growth can't just be at the top, it has to be for everyone. It has to be involve health of all kinds. About libraries, which Deb has written about career technical education and countless other things, and about, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, we have been more and more engaged in connecting people who are doing practical things, whether it's in Fresno, California, or in South Carolina, or in Vermont, or in Wisconsin, or in Iowa, where we've been recently. People who have found ways to address their challenges. And all these challenges all involve health in the broadest sense. I'm going to give the stage in just a moment to my beloved wife, Deb, who's going to tell you about one way we've seen this recently in a different part of the country. I'm going to run a slideshow for you, Deb, over here. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Deborah Fallows and what she's going to tell you about practical steps towards civic health. I give you Deb Fallows.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to all of you for having us here. As Jim said, we are very grateful to be here. We are delighted to be here. I'm going to take you on a lightning round slideshow of where we were most recently in Redlands, California, in a town that is undertaking a lot of efforts similar to what you're doing today. Many of the issues are the same, many of the endeavors are the same, but it looks completely different, and the story is quite different. So this is also an attempt to just show you what it's like to be a reporter on the road, what we actually did. This is my little intro, the reporter's notebook. As Jim said, this is our beloved little Cirrus plane. The interesting element of this, which will reassure you all, is that there's a parachute built into the entire plane. So if Jim gets knocked on the head, I can pull the parachute and it comes down, and it propels from the top of the plane, like those little balsa airplanes that you had when you were a kid that come floating in. You don't use it except in extremis.
Can I say something about this picture?
Sure.
Are there any pilots in the room? So this was my latest instrument proficiency check 3 weeks ago. So we're starting to keep at that.
Okay. We flew from Santa Barbara, California, where we were visiting some of our children and grandchildren, to Redlands. This is the bird's eye view from the Rose Bowl. My favorite altitude is about 2,500 feet, and this is what it looks like, Pasadena. Orange groves in Southern California just to set the stage. The pilot preparing for landing. All attention, eyes ahead. And what it looks like on the runway. We landed in San Bernardino, California, which is right next to Redlands, which is a former Air Force base, Norton Air Force Base, until the late 60s, early 70s? Yeah. The size of our airplane compared to like a fancy private jet. And Norton Air Force Base has been closed. It is now a kind of, well, I won't say graveyard, but it is where planes are taken to rehab. It's like the car collision center for airplanes. When we flew into Louisville, it was all UPS planes. Here in San Bernardino, Delta was really popular at the time. So then we are going on to Redlands, California, which is next to San Bernardino. It is a beautiful town, originally an orange growing town, settled by Easterners, people from Philadelphia and the Atlantic Seaboard who were coming to winter in California. It's a town of service, of philanthropy, of deep tradition, and it deliberately carries on those traditions to the children. Every fourth grader in the Redlands Unified School District, it participates in a historical tour of the town. They pile the kids onto the bus, take them from site to site, and say, here's where the founder lived. Here's where the first orange grove lived. Every site in the town, to try to inculcate them. And then the kids go home to their families and say, guess what I saw today? And as they're going around town. So it's building the tradition for every kid who is 9 years old in that town of what it came from. It's a beautiful, Jim calls it the poor man's Pasadena. It is not, well, it's a beautiful Southern California town. It also has a university, the University of Redlands, set in the mountains. Critical players are in this town. The university is one. What I'm showing you now is called SURF appropriately. It's the Sustainable Urban Farm, Sustainable University of Redlands Farm. Does that work? SURF. Yeah, kind of the surf motif going on. It is important because it is a focal point of a collaboration among many parts of the town to build a healthy community. SURF is an urban farm, and there are several critical players who play into this urban. Well, get a better. This is what it looks like. It's 2 acres of produce, an aspirational vineyard, composting, tree growing, and native habitats. This is a wintertime scene of what it looks like. They're growing the little vegetables. Oops, sorry. Vegetables getting a little bit bigger. The other critical player in the University of Redlands is the service learning requirement. 30 years ago, driven from students who had done some volunteer work around the town, they said to the university, look, we think this is so important to our education that we would like you to require volunteer service for every graduate of the university. So 30 years ago, they started a service learning requirement of 80 hours before graduation. A lot of the kids go and work on this urban farm. This young woman is actually this part of the second basic ingredient of why this collaborative effort works. She is part of the California Civic Action Corps. California has a volunteer organization at a statewide level. They have a college corps of students who receive some tuition in exchange for work they do. They have it's not Civic Action, Climate Action Corps of students who are postgrads. It's a full-time job. It's like AmeriCorps. It's kind of based on that schedule. They work full-time, and in the Climate Action Corps in Redlands, they have 3 students working on this farm. This young woman named Kari Krishna, a recent graduate of UR, is working on the native habitat, and she was also in the what's the word for that? The indoor gardening part.
Hydroponics or whatever?
No, anyway, she was working on the farm, the greenhouse. She was working in the greenhouse, growing things. And as these little plants grow, they are planted in the gardens. I love this picture because it takes me back to Dan Quayle and his creative spelling. It somehow took hold. So, there we are, stuck with tomato with an E. 2 of the other Climate Action Corps kids at Redlands one is a boy named Calhoun who was from Seattle. He is like 3 times my size. He was the center on the football team. During COVID, he, didn't get to play football as much as he wanted, et cetera, et cetera. But he came back to volunteer in the Climate Action Corps. he is responsible for digging those fields. This big, tough guy is a great model for the students who volunteer and work with them. They were covering it with a tarp so the weeds wouldn't go wild. The third climate action student is a kid named Brian Miranda, who comes from as tough a background as you can in Long Beach, California, kind of meandered around the state, ended up at graduating from a community college, then a university, and is now leading these students at the U of R in the farming field and has learned much himself. One of the big efforts at the farm, besides produce, is trees. And I know that you all here have tremendous tree projects that you are working on, planting trees, like they're doing in Redlands, California, too. It is it is soup to nuts trees in this farm. They start out with the little seedlings and with the tree stalk, and they grow them, and then this is what they look like. You know, it looks like a bunch of little dead tree stalk, but they actually grow into trees. And have 3 years ago started a tree planting process, partly with another collaborator in Redlands, which is ESRI. It's a geospatial mapping company that is centered in Redlands, and they donated. It is funded and owned by a couple who live in Redlands, and they also donated the thousands of trees in the first round of tree distribution, with all of the students in the Redlands Unified School District coming through. What's critical about this scene is this is Brian Miranda, one of the fellows in civic action, climate action. He is showing what Esri helped them develop as the heat map of Redlands, similar to what you all are familiar with in studying in Louisville. The sections of town that need trees the most, that are the hottest hotbeds of climate. And you can imagine that in Redlands, it's in what is called the north side of town, in the most distressed parts of town. So the geospatial company is helping them identify which neighborhoods need these trees most. The Surf Farm grows the trees. They work with the students and the Unified School District, who distributes the trees, educates the kids, teaches them how to plant the trees, how to water and care for the trees, and record them into a dashboard so that they see how the trees is going. It's a complete soup to nuts effort. This slide is a very interesting, smaller partner of this whole effort. It is a group of senior citizens, mostly retired people, who are interested in the whole climate change effort as well. And they're called ANCA. It's a kind of ugly acronym, but they're a fantastic group who works in an interesting way in Redlands. They had a little booth on this tree day too. Their how-to method is to try to get into the neighborhoods like the north side of Redlands and work with the community to be participants in this whole effort. The idea is not to say we're going to bring you trees, but to go to the trusted people who are usually from the faith community in those parts of town to say, let's find your leadership. Let's get a number of you engaged in this effort. Let's see if this is something that you want to do here, and let's see if we can all work together on this. So this older citizen group is a kind of subterfuge and quiet working, very much how-to, very much feet on the ground, very much let us help you, let us work with you, let us hear from you about what you want. It's not just trees, it's things like native plants, or you go to a book club. If that wants to be your organization, we will help your book club figure out how to do a program for the front yards of Redlands from turf to natural habitat, which is important there because it's near the desert. Water is expensive, it's hard to get. And if you're a book club or if you're an organization like the YMCA, this senior citizen group will come and help you with the how-tos of how to organize a small group, how to decide what issues are important to you, and how to execute them. Whoops. Did I go backwards here? No. Okay. We are back on the farm for a moment in the compost section, which I find fascinating because to me, this just looks like a big mess and how it can never turn into composting. But it's another interesting element of the collaboration that's going on with the university that the chemistry department is part of them. The engineering department is helping them learn how to irrigate their fields. And, the biology department is helping them with the composting to figure the whole thing out. So this is back to our young woman who is doing the native habitat. And she is, you can see, it looks very different from Louisville. But this is what grows. This is what people's front yards end up looking like. And this is Jim's favorite slide because.
Does anyone know what the metal objects in there are? Those are smudge pots. My first job as a kid was lighting smudge pots in the winter in the orange groves. That's how they used to keep the orange groves from freezing. The end.
Okay, great. So we're out of the farm. We're almost out of the farm. The revenues and the economic model for this farm is also interesting. They grow the crops. They sell half of the produce from the farm to the university food services. They buy them. So it's strictly a farm to table for from this farm to the tables in the dining rooms at the university. The other half of the food they donate to the food pantry, which I'll show you in a minute. But their newest revenue model is that they've discovered they can probably grow loofah. I had no idea, but you can grow loofah apparently on these farms, and you can set loofah is a pretty high revenue product. So here's loofah. That's my notebook. They're a bit aspirational, but back to the food pantry where they donate half of the produce. This isn't the produce. This comes from the local, obviously, grocery stores. Family Services in Redlands has a food pantry. Again, the students doing their volunteer service take the food to the food pantry, help organize it, distribute it every day to people who come in there. And also at the Family Services, there's a clothing center. There is a 3-meal-a-day center where people can come. Even in a town as affluent as Redlands, California, it's oversubscribed. Now comes the interesting part. When I was visiting the food pantry on a certain day, I saw this truck out in the parking lot called Renew and Refresh. It is a mobile unit for portable showers for people who don't have houses to live in or anywhere to go to the bathroom or take a shower. So they're on a published schedule. This unit drives around to different places in town. They're here twice a week for people who are coming to the food pantry and being fed to take these showers. This is one of the local faith service leaders who rounded up $50,000 or $60,000 to support this entire effort. That's all it took. They bought a truck. They have volunteers to bring the people into the zone. They register them, and this slide is very touching to me because you can see the tiny placard hanging from the doorknob. It says Anthony 1030. So when people come in to take their showers, they take their seats much like this, and they're given a little sign with their name and the time that they're going into the shower stall. And they have 15 or 20 or 30 minutes in the shower stall, depending on how long the line is. The volunteers do all of the work servicing these showers. They're people like you in this audience. They are there with their equipment. They clean it after each participant goes and takes a shower. And they also tell me the stories of when the people come out of these showers. I mean, you know how you feel when you come out of a shower. It's a wonderful feeling. And for the people who are able to use that, it's equally wonderful. Just one other tiny tell. This is what the College Corps and the Climate Action Corps students look like. They're primarily first-generation college students. They are on Pell Grants. They need this money financially for their education. They're mostly minority students. California now is able to support these students as well, $10,000 of their tuition if they're currently students, through, as well as Dreamers. So they have a small number of DACA kids who are able, this is the only place they can get money like this to support their education. One final thing I wanted to show you, because it's important to this whole ethos of what makes a healthy community, is the public art. We were in Riverside, right next door, seeing where some of the college course students were helping revitalize a neighborhood that was formerly so scary, even the people who lived there didn't want to go outside. But it's an example of art as a healing effort, art as a way to dignity and self-pride for the neighborhoods where they are living. So they've entirely transformed this section with the help of these college course students in Riverside, California. So Jim, I'm going to stop right here and turn over my clicker and go have a seat.
So in just a moment, I'm going to invite everybody to ask if you have any questions for Deb and me. I just want to say one other thing in conclusion about the kinds of scenes Deb was trying to present to you from Southern California. Some of you in Louisville may have heard over your lifetime the phrase laboratories of democracy, of course, originating from this town. And we know, of course, a century ago or whenever it was, there were states talking about laboratories of democracy from Justice Brandeis. We think that localities are at this moment laboratories of democracy and of sustainability and of health. And the main thing we're trying to convey, again, with Deb's presentation, is that every place you go in this country, you see ideas that can be applied elsewhere, whether it's the mobile showers or whether it's the climate core or whatever else. And so part of our excitement and mission now is connecting people who are doing that in Kentucky, with those in Nevada, with those in Florida, and every place else. And I'll just close with, if I were thinking from my very limited knowledge about your community, which you all know in your bones, that some of the themes we've seen in other parts of the country, which might be applicable here, is number one, an authentic sense of self and place. Knowing what the community is, what its story actually is, not pretending to be anyplace else, not pretending to be better or worse than it is, but understanding we are this town. This is our past, this is our present, this is our future, here's our story, and we have a million illustrations of that, but I think authenticity in this is who we are. Riverside, San Bernardino, Redlands, Louisville. I think that is one theme we have seen many places. We'll be happy to discuss. A second theme we've seen many places is what I think of, Deb and I think of as the Fres Yes theme. Many of you have heard of or been to the city of Fresno, California. Fresno was looked down on, by much of the state, much of the rest of the country. And about 10 years ago, some young people in Fresno said, "We're tired of this." They had a wonderful video called Unapologetically Fresno. And they said, Fresno, Fres Yes. And they're using the sort of the chip on the shoulder of "we're going to show you" as a motivation. We've seen that same spirit in Mississippi, in West Virginia, in Oklahoma, and other places. So that a narrative into a "we're going to show you" is something we've been impressed by. A third thing that we've seen that may be applicable here is the combination of educational institutions, research institutions, community colleges, the whole educational establishment, preparing people for the future and attracting new people to a community, and what the manufacturing establishment of the future is going to be. We know that manufacturing in the 1950s and 60s in the US is not coming back, but I think it's a upcoming golden age for high value manufacturing in the US, high skill manufacturing, of the kind in which there is a real tradition in this part of the country, in this area. So a combination of investing in education in all its aspects and preparing for manufacturing is important. And finally, and let me reference my pen, we've been struck by the importance of communities that embrace the entirety of their health, sustainability, future, and wholeness in physical health and economic health and civic health and all the other measures of health. So we think that what you all are doing here, we've been inspired in the past day here. We want to learn more. And so that is our message of how the tide is moving in favor of efforts like the ones you are undertaking here. And now I would like to invite Deb Fallows to come up to the microphone, and any of you to come to the side microphones if you have any questions. If not, we can filibuster further. But thank you all, and thank you, Todd, for having us here for your lecture series.
Wow, nobody else.
Yeah,
okay,
yes, sir.
Yeah. All right, thank you. I'm going to blame you guys a little bit for some of the things I have chosen to get involved with. My name is David Jones. I live in Louisville, and the notion that local solutions were important. You guys have been talking about this for a while. It led me, among other things, to run for the local school board. But of late, it's sort of a term, but of late, I've been much influenced by Ezra Klein's run, maybe I think his name is Marone, the urban planning guy, but the criticism of state, federal, local overlays that inhibit change at the local level. And so I guess I would love it if you could maybe, you're probably more erudite than I am at filling out what that critique is. But it's great to look at small scale solutions or places that don't have the kind of urban gum up that a lot of other places have. But what do you make of really of that critique? And, where do you target the local reform effort to really make a difference? Does that make sense?
So thank you very much.
Yeah.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for everything you have done here, including the school board, which is one of the highest services people can render. So is this okay? Yeah. So it is. This, as you know, is a very complex issue, and there are questions of both scale and of history. Path dependency. For example. I was actually born in Pennsylvania, even though I grew up in California. And one of the blights of Pennsylvania, which may have ramifications here in Kentucky, and a path-dependent one, is Pennsylvania has too many jurisdictions. It's full of tiny little counties and tiny boroughs and tiny commonwealths, and you can't do anything. In my home county in California, which you saw there, is bigger than the state of Connecticut. And so we have scale. You can do things countywide that have some impact. So that there are it's hard to remove some of the encumbrance. I know that Louisville and has the regional governance, which has its pluses and minuses, but it's an attempt to deal with that. I think that so I'm getting to a historical marker. There are parts of the country, especially ones that have grown in very unequal ways, like California, like the Bay Area of California, and Seattle and Los Angeles are probably the three leading cautionary examples of this right now. And Austin, Texas, where Deb got her graduate degree, and ultimately Bend, which was part of our movie, where the polarized growth has become just a problem in housing and everything else. And the most natural relief for it of building more housing is basically impossible because of all the overlays of laws and just as the U.S. Senate, I will say very carefully here, has become somewhat dysfunctional because it's so easy to block things from happening, and I'll just leave it at that. That is true in many localities, especially in these very high-income places. So I think that is a genuine crisis in California, especially the Bay Area. And I think the challenge for places that don't have that problem yet is managing their growth in such a way that it doesn't just become sprawl beyond the jurisdictional borders. It doesn't just price more people out. And I think there's a new movement of urbanism of how to allow for growth so you don't have the Bay Area situation, but also you don't have the situation of Sioux Falls, where the downtown of Sioux Falls, South Dakota is beautiful, but the periphery are just, kind of mall city. So I hope that will be the next wave of urbanism, of allowing growth in a way that is equitable and environmentally sustainable. And that's the best I can do at the moment.
Hi, I'm Aruni. I'm going to follow up on this question. And we worried about this for a long time, and there's a parallel in medicine. So the idea is whether you need small local solutions or you need systemic changes to make all of this. That some people don't have places to go to shower. Is it systemic failure, or is it something that could only be fixed to local action? So, for example, we've had in medicine that lots of people have bad teeth, right? So they were going to force everybody to have fluoride every day for 20 years, a pill every person needs to take. Or they can put fluoride in the water and then nobody has to worry about bad teeth, right? So how do we approach this set of problems? Are there some problems that completely recalcitrant to systemic changes and have to be local, or are there boundaries that we cross?
So so much, and the simplest version of my reply to this profound question would be the famous think global, act local. That of course global solutions are necessary. Of course, national politics matters. Of course, systemic changes like the ones you mentioned matter in immediate physical health and in the broadest sense of health. So I agree with all of that. And then the question is what you do tomorrow. And for most people, what you can do tomorrow is something locally, like running for the school board, or voting in a school board election, or going to a library, or doing anything else. Deb, do you want to say, or do you want not to say so?
I would.
This is not a usual moment in our relationship. So I think that my excuse me.
So what I was going to say, I just want to talk about the acting locally point for a moment, because when we would go into these towns, we wouldn't talk about all of these issues in a national sense. We would start out by asking people to describe what was going on in their towns. And when you ask that question, it is like opening the floodgates to a whole bunch of answers where people feel they have agency, they have possibility to act themselves. There is something they can do and they can figure it out. I noticed that in a video from the Envirome Institute, there is a phrase in there which we have heard, I would say, in 90% of the towns that we visited, which is, this town is big enough that there are so many interesting things going on. It's small enough that I can do something and have an impact. It's the perfect point. And interestingly, that is in towns from 2,500 people to 25,000 people to 225,000 people. Everybody says the same thing. I'm rambling, so you're coming back to put a shape onto it.
Yeah, so I'll just say one other thing. Obviously, there are circumstances that are beyond anyone's control. If you look over the last century in every single decennial census, most counties in the U.S. have lost population, as really small settlements have just not been able to go on. So there are things that are bigger than anybody's control, but it's that where on the continuum between things that are bigger than you and things that are your size, you can do something about. We all, every day, as you are doing, make our decisions. So I think this is our last question, so please, yes.
Good evening. I'm wondering if you have encountered the movement that's going on. I've seen it in Pomona, California, in which they're trying to implement a locally developed circular economy that is bottom up. So there's very much ownership from people who most need a local economy. And they've partnered with the Institute for Ecological Civilization, and also they are very much involved in Compassionate City. So I'm just curious if you've seen that sort of thing.
So we have been to Pomona a million times, but I did not know about that. So this is the kind of thing which makes it exciting to go on the road. Say, did you know about X circular economy in Pomona? We didn't, but that is so. But the things you saw in Riverside were sort of like that, right? But so it is. Okay, one more question, then I will. Yes, I'll leave everybody to the second.
This is fairly timely and may or may not be on topic, but I think our presidents are supposed to be involved in improving our society as a whole, as well as our communities. And I think the Jimmy Carter Center has played a big part in improving the societies and communities of the world. So tell us a little bit about being the speechwriter for Jimmy Carter.
Thank you for asking that. I'll say it is, nobody could have expected there would be this long twilight period for Jimmy Carter. It's been more than 2 weeks since he announced he was going into hospice. And so it has been a time when people have been able to write assessments and appreciations of what he stood for and what he meant, while we can still refer to him in the present tense. He was, I think, I wrote something saying he was an unlucky president. You know, being president in the late 1970s, anything that could go wrong went wrong. Some of it was his doing, a lot of it was not his doing. It was a bad time. I think no one on earth has ever said, let's go back to the late 70s. You know, it was a really challenging time, from 21% inflation to the Iran hostage crisis. But Jimmy Carter was fortunate in having had these 42 years now of since his presidency to reinvent that role of being the former president, to do good in countless areas, from monitoring elections to dealing with diseases, dealing with the guinea worm, which sounds like it doesn't matter, but profoundly does, to standing up for various values that he cares about. And also, he's lived long enough to do something that he never did. Harry Truman is seen as a much better president about 20 years after he left office, but Harry Truman is dead by then. Jimmy Carter is having his administration reassessed while he has been around. So I think that one can argue about his success in office, and I think he was better as a president than he seemed at the time, but his success as a human being and as a moral and civic example is beyond question. And I think we're all fortunate that he's been around for these many years after his presidency, even for these last 2 weeks, these past 2 weeks, not the last 2 weeks, but the past 2 weeks, to have the world begin to assess what he stood for.
Well, thank you all for coming. We had, in the early 19th century, we had democracy in America, traveling the country, talking about how Americans love to associate, civic and social clubs and so forth. Then you had John Gunther in the 1940s talking about Inside the USA. And today, in the 21st century, we have Jim and Debbie Fallows giving a sweeping survey of quite positive news from the heartland. So let's give them another hand of applause. And I'd like to present them with this token of our appreciation for their coming to Louisville. Thank you.
This is beautiful. Thank you very much. We're really, really honored to be here. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Todd.
And with that, I invite you all to cocktails downstairs.
This is beautiful.
Oh.